This is cosy.
Yes, how should we arrange ourselves?
Hi, everybody. Thanks. That was an amazing talk by Alice, I was going to say. Yeah, rousing. So we're back again, and you guys have all met Eddie and Merlin. And I just wanted to introduce you to Lucy. So, as Julia said, Lucy's she's a researcher, has worked on the 6 inches of soil, but it's really, she does lots of research which is focusing on human and soil relationships. So I thought we'd get you to maybe tell us a little bit about that, so when we start asking questions.
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for inviting me, and really excited to be here. And yeah, we're sort of introducing the human and their sort of potentially destructive role. I also want to talk about, humans and their sort of, since soils are responsive to human activity, we also, have regenerative role to play as well. But yeah, just coming back to my academic background, I'm an anthropologist, and I'm interested in that sort of the changing human-soil relationships really over the last 12,000 years. So sort of taking on from Eddie, I'm looking at sort of Neolithic onwards. And yeah, I'm also interested in this moment where I think there is a bit of a resurgence of interest in soil-centered gardening and certainly the regenerative farming movement. So yeah, in my academic work, I'm really influenced as a social scientist by this sort of post-humanist turn in the social sciences that, previously, we'd studied humans very much as humans, and the environment, the natural world was sort of a backdrop to that. But post-humanist thinking really tries to see humans as part of the natural world, see our interconnectedness, and sort of break down those hierarchies and boundaries between humans and the non-human or the more than human world. So my particular work is interested, I'm interested in, soil as this sort of nature cultural medium, and thinking about how humans imbue soil with meaning over time. And certainly I think, in Western cultures, we make this quite sharp distinction between humans and their soils, even though they're what give us our sustenance. And that's even despite the fact that, all in the major Western religions, they talk about the fact that we are dust. Genesis chapter 3, verse 19, from the ground we come, to the ground we return. And also I think in the English language, we also struggle to describe exactly what soils are, and our language doesn't quite capture their, you've talked about their sort of processual nature of fungi, the fact that soils are always becoming, they're always soiling, they're always becoming something, they're not a static thing, and they have this aliveness to them. But certainly that relationship between soil and humans is not the same in all cultures, and our Western, sort of sharp Western distinction is only one way of knowing soils, and that's something that it's important to remember. And I think you mentioned about my research in Leicester. We talked about this before, and I worked 2021 with 30 growers and gardeners in the city of Leicester where I live. My growers were all from sort of diasporic backgrounds, so they weren't actually from Leicester. And what I noticed was that they just sort of really derived a strong sense of belonging, not just from the place that they were gardening, but from the process of caring for soils, from the process of composting, from the process of feeling that they were being responsive to their soil's needs. From feeding the soils. And I think what's interesting is, there's some quantitative work looking at the soil, health quality in Leicester. Urban soils are usually thought of as being sort of degraded or of low quality, but in these gardens and allotments, we found that the sort of levels of soil health were sort of comparable to semi-natural systems because of the work. Not because there was anything naturally healthy about Leicester's soils, but because of that work that growers and gardeners were doing, and potentially that motivation of that sense of belonging to that process.
Shall we start with that then? So how each of you and what you think your connection with the soil is, and how that's kind of evolved over the years. And also let's think about, you know, I keep going back to books, but braiding sweetgrass, you know, changed my kind of view on how other societies look at soil and the natural world around us. I mean, are we further away from that now? How can we get closer to that? Like, what are your relationships with the soil, and how did that all start?
Well, for me, I mean, soils were halfway to being degraded in the mid-80s when I started my career, and I was working and doing trial pits in fields that had, you know, 9-foot-tall oilseed rape or 6-foot-tall hay, you know. And now the rapeseed's that tall. I mean, we've just given away this enormous amount of biomass, this carbon that was just given to us for free, and nitrogen and all the other minerals, for the sake of machinery, because it's easier to get the same yield and just go through the trash. So, you know, so we're losing carbon that went into the soil. And having worked on farmlands for 35 years, you know, and I mentioned this morning in my talk about standing in that field of potatoes washed off with sulfuric acid. I mean, that isn't the worst. I mean, you go to some of the East London market garden sites that are trying to do 3 crops a year, and they're putting plastic covers over there and pumping fluoride bromine gases to kill everything, including fungal spores. You know, it's just wrong.
So,
it's just, you feel just so guilty because you can sense the life sapping out of the soil. And I mentioned about walking over the fields of sulfuric acid, and it just felt like concrete. And it was silent, and it was absolutely silent. And I thought, you know, a lot of farmers are into this regenerative lark, but gardeners aren't. So I've chosen the pathway of saying I need to tell the gardeners this story.
well, I mean, from your work, and then you also have an allotment, so you've got both sides of that. How do they affect one another?
Well, oh crikey! Well, So when we started our family 30 years ago, the first thing I did was put an allotment in the back garden in the house I moved into, because I didn't want to eat what was coming off these fields, you know. And but for the first sort of 15, 18 years of that, I was actually using my rotavator, and I was completely organic, never a chemical in my garden, and the soil started crusting over, and I started to notice germination rates dropping, and I thought, what am I doing? I'm doing everything right. So I got my hand lens out. In fact, this hand lens, it goes, oh no, it's in my bag. It goes everywhere with me, my little hand lens. Oh, it's in this pocket. And I looked at this and I thought, God, it's crusted over. So 12 years ago, there was Google. There wasn't 30 years ago, so I Googled soil crusting, and the first thing I came across was biological crusts as a way of an evolution of a landscape. And I realized that it was the disturbance, the constant disturbance. So I stopped digging, hung the rotavator up, and and put composts and organic matter down.
Yeah.
And the next year it was transformed. And I just thought, well, if it's as easy as that, wow, what a lesson.
Why aren't we all doing it?
What a lesson, absolutely. Yeah.
And Merlin, what's your connection with the soil?
It's a long and winding road. When I was little, I used to spend time in the garden. I had a hole. My dad gave me an area in the garden that I could dig a hole, and I would go and dig my hole, and then I'd sort of sit in the hole and dig. But I think that's, thinking on it now, that's probably the time when I first have really spent time in the soil, and was curious about it, and like to sort of go downwards. But the way I thought about it really started to change. I read a book called Farmers of 40 Centuries by a chap called King, written in 1911. And he talks about walking along roads in rural China. He's an English traveller in rural China. And he talks about how villagers would be soliciting the travellers to come and use their toilet, not the neighbour's toilet, because the human feces was so valuable. And that so this got me thinking, this idea that that our fertile soil is the most valuable thing that we have, and we help to make the fertile soil. And so then later on along this same line of thought, I was hearing about these Amazonian dark earths, these terra pretas, layers and layers and layers of this extremely rich soil. created by humans in areas that have not been thought to be agricultural, but turn out to be. And then, a little further along this line, with the work of an anthropologist at Sussex called James Fairhead, and he has done astonishing work in coastal West Africa, looking at termites. And these are termites, they make mounds, which are sophisticated architectural structures. They regulate the amount of CO2 and oxygen and temperature. And these termites farm a fungus. And people have land disputes about who gets the termite mound, because these termite mounds are said to wake up the soil. And women of these people, they eat the soil. It's called geophagy. And people put soil on wounds. They line their huts with soil. So the idea that the soil, it doesn't just, it might sometimes come for free, but a lot of the time we're building it, we're helping to build it, and we are really looking out for it in this way. So that really changed, that kind of trajectory of thought changed the way I imagine it.
I think we should talk a little bit more about humanure, because I think that Charles Dowding uses it, and it's been discussed quite a lot, but maybe we'll touch back on that in a minute. But Lucy, what's your connection with the land, and how has it changed over time, or what can you see that's going on in the world?
Well, starting from my own background, my mum was always a keen gardener. There was always composting going on. And throughout, the 80s, when I was very young, I was sort of trotted along to the Chelsea Flower Show. And through various family connections, I had this job of presenting the flowers to the winner. So I don't know whether I'm hopefully thinking I might have met Beth Chatto at some point there as a sort of 6-year-old, cute little 6-year-old with a bunch of flowers. So that's always, I think, having that background, has always drawn me to the garden. And then, after university, I wasn't sure what to do, and I spent a summer working at Riverford Organic Farm, Totnes in Devon, and there's, as well as working in the soils, there's lots of interesting ideas going on down in Schumacher College and Dartington around, food and local food and sustainability that sort of really got me sort of inspired and excited. And yeah, at the time, I thought, Riverford Organics, this must be the sort of paragon of, what the best farming can possibly be. So it's been an interesting journey to make our film, 6 Inches of Soil, and look a bit more deeply into soil health and, some of the tensions and, conflicts that organic farmers have, especially large scale, around ploughing the soil, which, becomes necessary sometimes. So, yeah, it's definitely been a very interesting journey.
I love all those stories, and I think that this room is probably full of people who have a real connection with the soil, but people outside this room seem to have stepped away from nature. There's a big disconnect. Do you see that? And how do we fix that? Like, why is that happening at the moment? How do we come back from it? Who would like to go first? It's a big question, I know.
Well, I nearly missed the boat, actually, gardening-wise, because when I was 5, we worked on my mum and dad's allotment since I was that high. Yeah. And one Christmas, my dad said, here, boys, me and my brothers, we've got a treasure hunt for you. So I'm getting really excited. There's Christmas Day and there's a treasure hunt. And we had a map, and we go up to the allotment, and we've got our spades, and we're digging down, and you go down about a foot. My big brother did, because he was the big brother. Boom. We've hit something. Oh my God, this is unreal. We've got a map with a cross on it. There's an allotment. And we pulled it up, and my dad's standing there, and I can see him now looking like, and I'm thinking, oh God, you can't fit a train set in that, but maybe it's a football. But what about my brothers? Where's their tin? I opened the lid off, and he said, this is treasure, and it was potatoes for Christmas dinner. I don't know why that didn't put me off forever, but you know what? I look back now, and I think that actually truly was treasure.
Yeah. I think that's such a lovely story to have, and such a good connection. I just think that people who...
It was a close thing, mind.
It could have gone either way. It's true. But just thinking about, kids, who maybe don't have access to outdoor spaces. You all had outdoor spaces to access. You had spaces that were yours to dig and play with and whatever. And often people have a balcony or maybe a park. So how do we make those people, interested in all the things that you're saying?
Well, can I just say, what I found is that schools are phenomenally interested in this.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's going to become part of the curriculum. I've been working the last couple of years with Plant Your Pants. Have you heard of that one?
Yes.
Plant Your Pants, yeah. Yeah, you get the school, there was 600 schools last year. I think there were many more this year. But basically, they get a pair of size 28 bleached cotton M&S special knickers.
Okay.
Put them in the garden beds of the children's allotment on these schools, and leave it 3 months, and then dig them up. So I was invited to the big reveal at the school in London, and after 3 months I was astonished. There was just the elastic band bit left. I'd managed to find a little bit of fibre, put it under the microscope, we took it into the classroom. Cut long story short, I've never seen so many nematodes. I said to the school, "You've just invented a new compost, Granny's knickers." It's just absolutely brilliant. But the soil that I took a sample of, literally 6 inches away from the cotton bit, no microorganisms visible under the microscope at all, apart from bacteria, because they're always there. No protozoans, no amoeba, no nematodes. But clearly this was a foodstuff. And just that one bit of foodstuff, the whole soil came to life. So, yeah, it's important. Feed the soil.
You go.
Well, I just wanted to follow on from that. We did a sort of if I don't know if anyone's seen our film 6 Inches of Soil, but thank you. in one scene, we bring school children onto the little market garden that AD, one of our growers, has set up, and you see their faces. They come from a local town. They're not really exposed to soil, and they're so excited. I think that age, like 7, 8, 9, they really sort of get the sort of viscerality of soil. And we did a Plant Your Plants, and we've got great shots, even though they didn't end up in the film, of the kids with like wide open mouths going, "What happened to the pants?"
This is the way to get people interested.
Yeah.
What happened to the pants? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also that viscerality and the sort of texturality. I mean, I'm sure we can talk about our films, but there's something about the sort of multi-sensory nature of soil that you can't just know by looking at soil. You need to sort of get your hands in it, and that's also something my growers said. They would be gardening, and even if they started off with gloves on at one end of the garden, by the end, they'd find them sort of scattered all over the place because they just wanted to be barehanded in the soil because they recognised that was a way of knowing. Beyond what they could see, that feeling.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think, we can talk about film, but the sort of viscerality is important.
I love Plant Your Pants. That's so clever. I was just thinking that, it comes down to education, and the educational curriculums and what's available to kids. It's shocking when it comes to microbes, fungi, soils. And that really needs to change. Children's imaginations are invited by films and books to travel to distant planets, to outer space. They're invited to travel backwards in time to creatures like dinosaurs who are now extinct. But rarely have I found them encouraged to send their imaginations down into the soil. And Plant Your Pants is a fantastic way to do it. And I was thinking, when I was little, one way that I found really helpful was, many of you might have tried this. You get a sort of clear plastic bottle, and you cut the top off. You put layers of sand, soil, and leaves in dried leaves, leaf litter. And then add worms. And over a few weeks, you can see the worms take the layers, mix them all up between each other. And in the end, you get a totally different, you get what looks like a kind of healthy, loamy soil. But I was imagining you could make this in a bigger format and have it in classrooms. And you might start at the beginning of the term with these layers, and you add the worms, and maybe everyone could add the worms. And you'd slowly watch day by day as this mixing took place, and it's a way, would be a way of illustrating the livingness of the soil and how dynamic it is. And so that may be one thing. But I also then had another thought, which is that a professor I worked with in Germany, he told me a story about how he first got into roots and root fungi and his obsession with going down into the soil. And when he was little, he went to see an exhibit, a sculpture called the Vertical Earth Kilometer. And if you went to the sculpture, what you would see was a circle of metal, which was the top of a kilometer-long brass rod that was going down into the ground. But all you could see was the top bit, this top circle on the ground. And he said that incited in him such a feeling of vertigo and curiosity about what was going on down there. That he ended up dedicating his life to the study of roots and what's underground. And I find that a really helpful thought experiment. You know, when I really think about what's going on down there, when I let my imagination go there, I do feel vertigo, like we're walking on the surface of an ocean of land. That sense of mystery, that sense of depth, that sense of power and unknown. Like, if we can wake that feeling up in people, I think that would change.
Yeah, definitely. When Alice was saying 8 meters of people, like, wow, that's a lot of people, you know, to get through. And so the three of you, you've got books, films and books, and education. So when people watch those, read those, come to your classes, what are the responses to those things? I mean, how do they respond to those?
The usual response is, wow, that was a lot of information.
I concur from today,
Yeah, that was mind-blowing. Perspective shifting is a common one. And but in fact, while I was over there this morning, I had a text from a recent client on a composting workshop who's already bought his wire baskets, and he's already built up his Johnson soup bioreactor. And that's just a joy to get that response.
And who are the people that come on your courses? Are they people?
So farmers mostly on the microscopy workshop, I have to say, because they're wanting to measure.
Yeah.
Head gardeners on the sort of theory, the gardening and growing workshops, and then everybody else on the composting workshops.
Yeah.
I've had a few what I would call, allotmenteers and gardeners on the gardening and growing, who try and put the science into a sort of really easy to handle way. So it's really good. It's everybody. We're just actually setting up a children's rhizophilia for children workshop. So pretty from all genres and
everywhere.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And Lucy, so you've got your film, but you're also coming at from the slightly different angle. You know, you're talking about humans and their relationships too. I mean, how have people responded to you about the film?
Well, when we started making the film, I mean, it was about 4 years ago, and it felt like soil. You're making a film about soil. It was a bit niche, bit odd. And, I think we've seen, even within the last couple of years, like a massive rise in interest, certainly in regenerative farming, partly helped by, government finally catching up with subsidies to farmers for sort of more regenerative practices. But, also, books that have come through, like Gabe Brown's book. I think there's been a sort of a coalescence of interest that meant that when we launched our film, January, this is a small, self-funded, self-distributed film that we made as a sort of passion project, launched at the Oxford Real Farming Conference in January. What we did is we made it easy for people to do community screenings, so to organise their own. It's not very expensive to do that, and then to have a panel and a meal or something. And since January, we've had like 400 screenings, and that's through people, finding out about the film, going, I want people to see this, I want to have this discussion, I want this discussion to be sparked. And that's been everywhere from farmers' barns to village halls to, gardening clubs and corporate boardrooms even, hopefully DEFRA as well. But I think it's had more of a life than we thought it ever would do.
I've actually seen it at the Wellington Film Festival.
Brilliant.
Which is like,
Wellington
okay.
in New Zealand?
No, in Somerset.
Okay.
And at the
we did have 50
at a
screenings
farming
in New Zealand.
conference
Yeah.
a few weeks later.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, it's going everywhere. It's brilliant.
I hope that what we've got is the right balance of human story, because it follows the story of 3 new entrant farmers, the right amount of kind of technical know-how, so it's of interest to farmers as well as the sort of general public, and other sort of nice bits. It's quite an emotional film, but it's quite honest and authentic. I think that's what people respond to. It's definitely had more of a life than we could ever have imagined, and delighted.
I love the fact that you can see that from the beginning of it, when nobody was interested, to 4 years down the line, now everybody's interested. That whole human connection has changed. Obviously, that's what we're saying.
Yeah. Long way to go, but
Yeah, there's always a way to go.
conversation.
And Merlin, I was going to think about your film as well, because I saw your film, because obviously I'm obsessed with fungi and all your book and stuff. And I was chatting to you about it, and what I was thinking when I was watching it was like, well, is there not more of the book in here? And then you said it was made for kids.
Well, yeah, so it's an IMAX film and an IMAX short, 40-minute long short, and it's not strictly for kids, but it has to be very kid-friendly, because it's often shown in science museums and these IMAX cinemas where kids come on school trips, and they all file in and then file out, and it's part of a school day out. So, and that was really fun to do it that way, because that feels like the right kind of place to aim that story. And if it's done well for kids, I think that there's a kid in all of us, and if you can make a good kids production, then everyone can really have fun too. And so that was gratifying, and a lot of the film really is time lapses. There's time lapses of mushrooms growing and time lapses of mycelial networks growing, captured by a guy called Steve Axford, who does the mushrooms, and someone called Wim van Egmond, who does the mycelium. And that, for me, is the most important part. It's like you can see with your own eyes these fungi behaving and self-choreographing right there. And that can do more than words ever can. And especially Wim's shots, where he has these amazing cutaway views, so you can see these mycelial networks exploring the soil, but sped up. So you can join their time frame for a moment. And for me, that's totally mind-blowing. And to have that on a massive screen in 3 dimensions is,
And let's just talk a little bit about research and what's happening and where the sort of future lies in all of the things that you're interested in. So what's happening at the moment, and how is it going to connect with people and the soil?
There's an awful lot of research going on in the farming community on endophytes. I mentioned something this morning, this aminocyclopropane carboxylate deaminase, which I then ran out of time. Easy for me to say, but then I ran out of time to basically, in all the plants, these endophytes are there, and they are supporting the plant. When a plant gets stressed, whether it's drought or even high wind, then genes switch on and it starts to produce ethylene. What the plant is basically saying, the ethylene, which can be used as a hormone in many ways, it's basically saying, oh crikey, we better give up, because, you know what, too stressed. Yeah. They're actually quite soft like that, plants are. And
does that, then it emits it to other plants?
No. What happens is that the plant then starts to abscissa the leaves, or wants to abscissa the leaves, so it's starting to cut off the supply to the leaves, so the plant is effectively shutting down. The idea is, if it's going to be stressed, there's no point in taking it to continuing to grow. You might as well recycle it back into the ground, ready for next year's crop. But there's another bacteria. These are the endophytes. There's various types. Pseudomonas does this, and they produce this. To make ethylene, the plant needs to go into its cupboard and pull out aminocyclopropane carboxylate, and that's the precursor to ethylene. So it grabs it out of its little recipe, puts it in, starts to make ethylene, starts to abscissa the leaves. But what if the conditions change? What if it starts to rain? What if the wind stops blowing? And there's this lovely dynamic that goes on in plants, and that's led by the bacteria particularly. And this Pseudomonas basically creates this substance. It secretes this substance through the cells of the plants called aminocyclopropane carboxylate deaminase. Deaminase means it takes off the ammonium group. So when the plant is looking for the aminocyclopropane in the cupboard, it's not there, because this has denatured it. And as a consequence, you get this dynamic of ethylene and deaminase, until the conditions change. If they do change and ameliorate, then guess what? This one wins out. The plant manages to then continue to produce towards seed. If it doesn't change, then the plant cuts its losses and dies. Now, they're using these endophytes in fruit production, because if you can actually delay, and this is what they're doing with strawberries, if you can actually delay the natural life cycle of a strawberry plant, they're probably doing it on raspberries and blackcurrants and other soft fruit, then you get another 2 or 3 weeks of photosynthesis out, which means you get more sugars and more nutrient density in your produce. So that's the endophytes, and what they do, that's a big source of research. Fascinating.
How do we get that? and put it on our strawberries.
How do we get that?
Yeah, how do we get this, whatever the word was?
Actually, there is a hack for that. So these endophytes...
Notebooks out, there's a hack.
Yeah, these endophytes, they're particularly prevalent in willow and poplar.
Oh.
And so if you shred, I mean, diversity is everything, but if you add some thin willow and thin poplar to your shreddings for your compost mix, then you're going to have those endophytes in your compost heap, in your soil, and through the rhizophagy kind of effect, when the exudates go down into the soil, those little bacteriums will go in and go, oh, this looks nice, and then whoosh, they will get put out into the various compartments of the plant.
Well, I'm going to leave this to everybody, right? We've got to try this now. Willow.
Go for
and
that.
Yeah, and next year when we get back, or whenever
That's
it is,
the
we're going to have to
theory.
discuss
That's
how
the
sweet our
theory.
strawberries are. And so research in your field?
So, well, you know, again, when we started off looking at, soil-human relations, it was a very sort of niche little part of the environmental humanities, and now I realise that now I've sort of, we've essentially sort of set up a whole field now of the soil humanities, trying to understand it. And, you know, it's dialogic as we're more, as, you know, the interest in regenerative farming develops, there's more to study, more human-soil relations to study. But I was going to mention that with our film, we've now got some funding to do an educational cut. So, you know, as we said, you know, kids might be, you know, one of the most important constituencies to take this work to. So we're going to sort of, there's going to be a cut of the film that we'll take. And actually, that's something that, you know, in the Q&As of our films, people were saying, can't you get this into schools? And we're like, not in an hour and a half, but maybe, you know, little snippets and clips.
40 minutes with Björk, that's what we needed.
Yeah.
Merlin, have you got any other research things, or shall we open it to the floor?
I'm happy to open it. I mean, I could talk about soil research for ages.
I mean, does anybody have any questions? There's a lady here, sorry. I didn't give you enough time. Sorry, it said 5 minutes. I thought we should ask. And Joe from earlier. There she is.
I have a question to Merlin, and maybe Eddie can also add. Actually, we are facing so many problems caused by fungi. For example, ash dieback, Dutch elm disease, and so on. And this is the reason why big trees in the cities are dying, and it's really difficult to find big trees to the urban situation. And also, we are facing challenges in agriculture. We need to use fungicides. And my question is about fungicides. Is there any situation you justify use of fungicides, or absolutely no? I know there is a vaccine for Dutch elm disease, but it's extremely expensive, and so on. So is there any reason we should use them? And also, what is the impact? For how long the fungicides stay in the soil? You mentioned that they even absorb heavy metals. Thank you.
So, there are definitely reasons why we'd use fungicides. You know, fungi can cause us all sorts of problems, and especially plants. The rice blast fungus ruins a quantity of rice every year, enough to feed 60 million people. As you mentioned, these diseases of trees transform landscapes. Fungal diseases of humans are on the rise. In fact, in part, people think due to the overuse of fungicides. So we're creating, like antibiotic resistance, we're creating the conditions for fungi to become resistant to fungicides, which would be the way that we would treat them in a body. You know, if you have an immunocompromised person and they have a fungal infection, and you want a functioning fungicide, just like you want an antibiotic. You know, it doesn't mean you want to kill all the bacteria in the world, but sometimes we do need to kill bacteria in a body of a human or in a plant that we depend on. So for sure, there's time and place for using them. But fungi, in almost every aspect of fungal existence and relationship with humans, they're understudied. So there's not a single vaccine developed against a fungal disease of humans. The amount of money given to the medical research into fungal diseases of humans is tiny compared with that given into bacteria and viruses, even though there are major threats. So that really needs to change. There are 4 classes of fungicide which are becoming less and less effective. We need to develop more. So yeah, this is a really important area. And I tend to talk more about the positive side of fungi because where fungi are mentioned generally in the past, they're mentioned as agents of death, decay, and disease. So that's where they've had the most exposure. And of course that's important, but when you look at the big picture of fungi, it's only a very tiny proportion that cause those problems. So not trying to play down the problems and also not trying to villainize an entire kingdom of life. Oh yeah, so how long do the fungicide stay in school? It depends on the fungicide. I don't have a good answer for that. I think it depends on the soil and the conditions and other factors like that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Rebecca? Should we go to Rebecca and then we'll come to you in a second? Is that all right?
All right, thank you. This question is from Merlin, and I think it's a common one because it is about anthropomorphization in the language of cooperation. But what I'm curious about is what Alice brought up so beautifully was the way that science just naturally goes towards language of competition and even warfare, and that is completely acceptable, even though it is clearly yet another form of anthropomorphization. And so I'm curious about your take on that whole debate, and really for everybody as well, but also can we get another debate going on the language of warfare and competition and how relevant that is as well?
It's the study of the history of the study of symbiosis is fascinating, and it becomes clear when this word was brought into the biological sciences in the late 19th century. And since then, you can see the study of symbiosis as a prism through which societal values are dispersed. And also every possible metaphor has been applied to plants and fungi, or the partners in a lichen, or from the relationships between men and women, relationships between nations, master and slave, all of them, and even through the utopic picture. This is a caring, sharing world. Everyone's looking out for each other, and so it's a way that it makes sense that we would want to put our metaphors for describing togetherness, that we would use those to understand the togetherness of other organisms. My own view is that the metaphor is unavoidable, analogy is unavoidable. It does useful work for us within the sciences and every other aspect of our lives, and that we get into trouble when we forget that we're using a metaphor or an analogy, when we don't use a varied range of analogies and metaphors. And I think we just need a balanced narrative diet, and to remember that we're using these and that they're stories, and it can help us see further and not try and not forget that they are stories and so mistake them for the truth. In terms of conflict and competition, I see this togetherness of the living world as collaboration, and collaboration always being an alloy of competition, conflict, and cooperation, just like, and that can be fluid, and those different dynamics or modes can flow into one another. Like I think of family dinners at home when I was growing up, and you'd have conflict, competition, and cooperation all on display, seamlessly blending into each other as we behaved as a functioning family. Sometimes, and most of the time when we were good. So that's
I'm so sorry. Can I just get one more question in, and then do you want?
I just want to very quickly link these two together.
Yeah.
I think nature wants us to be healthy. I'm an optimist. Yeah. And I think we have to accept as a race, particularly in the Western world, that we are malnourished and our plants are malnourished. And coming to the competition, we are being fed, ultra-processed foods. It's commercial competitiveness. We're not eating fresh vegetables. Please, go home, dig up a part of your garden, inoculate it, because you've dug it, inoculate it, put your own vegetables in, make your own healthy food. If we are fully healthy, we will not get disease. The ash dieback, if the trees were not environmentally stressed by what we're chucking into the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, they would not get ill. That's an underlying principle of nature.
Good point. just, can we fit in one more question, because Rachel is there?
So going to the subject you were talking about with the relationship with people with soil, and obviously we've talked about how we can get a better relationship with the soil through education. As designers, I'm probably not the only one in the room who's come across new builds, gardens, or gardens you've gone in after some form of construction work's happened, and you're dealing with, you've got compaction, soil completely trashed. What would your recommendations be for remediating that soil? I mean, ideally, we would be able to just work with the soil we've got, but if it's completely trashed, we're kind of on a hidey to nothing. So what your recommendations would be to remediate, and what would you do in different circumstances, different soil types, sorry?
Okay, so we've got 10 seconds each to answer this question. Shall we start with you, Eddie?
Yeah, if it's been compacted by human action, you've got to dig it to undo that compaction. 40 years ago, if you were told to take antibiotics, you were just told to take antibiotics, sort out your problem and go. Nowadays, you're told, if you've got antibiotics, take a probiotic. So if you're going to dig in any way, shape or form, or even possibly put a little bit of chemical on the ground, inoculate it with a good biological compost immediately afterwards.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Was that 10 seconds?
Yeah, you're going to pass?
Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. Merlin, 10 seconds, rounding us up.
Crikey.
No pressure.
I would just say, I wouldn't add any practical tips to that, just because 10 seconds is short, but to remember that the soil is alive, and to try and manage processes rather than micromanage particular organisms.
Thank you so much, panel. I hope that was interesting for you guys.